Okay, so get this. We're diving into forensic genetic genealogy today.
Yeah.
It's basically where family trees and crime scenes kind of like, collide. And it's changing how we solve mysteries, especially like cold cases.
It really shows how DNA technology is moving beyond just like paternity tests or, ancestry research.
Right.
We're talking about using genetics to like crack cases that have been cold for decades.
Right. Like Buckskin Girl.
Oh, yeah.
This young woman was found in Ohio back in 1981.
Right.
And remained unidentified for years. Can you imagine being her family not knowing what happened?
Oh, absolutely.
Thankfully, in 2018, a new technique helped crack the case wide open.
That technique is forensic genetic genealogy, and it's different than traditional DNA databases like CODIS,
Right.
which are mostly used to match individuals or very, very close relatives. Instead, it taps into public databases like GED Match, where people who have done DNA testing through companies like 23andMe or Ancestry can upload their results.
So it's kind of like a massive online family reunion, but with DNA.
Exactly, and that's the key.
Okay.
Forensic genetic genealogy works by finding relatives, even distant ones, through shared DNA.
Okay.
You might be connected to someone on GED Match as a third or fourth cousin and not even know it.
Wow. So even if you've never taken a DNA test yourself, you could potentially be identified through a distant relative's profile.
That's right. That's why this technique is so powerful for identifying unknown victims or suspects. In the Buckskin Girl case, they were able to use GED Match to eventually identify her as Marcia King.
Wow.
Think of the relief for her family, especially her mother, who never changed her phone number.
Wow.
Always hoping for her daughter's return.
That's a pretty powerful story. It makes you wonder how many other families out there are still waiting for answers.
Right.
And how many cases could be solved with this technology?
What's tons? I mean,
I remember the Golden State Killer case was cracked using a similar approach.
Yeah.
It seems like forensic genetic genealogy is really gaining traction.
It is. Since the Golden State Killer case, we've seen over 24 suspects identified.
Wow.
And in even the first conviction back in December 2018.
That's amazing.
But with this power comes a lot of questions, especially about privacy.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
We've talked about GED Match, but how does it actually differ from those traditional DNA databases?
Yeah.
I'm guessing it has to do with the type of genetic information they use.
You're exactly right. Traditional databases like CODIS primarily rely on STRs, or short tandem repeats.
Okay.
These are short sequences of DNA letters that repeat a certain number of times, and the number of repeats can vary from person to person.
So it's almost like a genetic stutter.
Yeah.
And you can use those stutters to identify individuals.
Precisely. But STRs are only really useful for matching individuals or immediate family members.
Okay.
GED Match, on the other hand, utilizes SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms.
Okay, so SNPs.
These are single-letter variations in the DNA code. Think of it like this.
Okay.
STRs are like looking at a few sentences in a book, while SNPs are like analyzing the entire book letter by letter.
So GED Match is getting a much more complete picture of your DNA.
Yes.
No wonder it can connect you to distant relatives. That's a game changer for forensic investigations.
Absolutely.
But is it as simple as just like running the DNA through a computer and getting an instant answer?
Not at all. Forensic genetic genealogy is a very complex and time-consuming process.
Okay.
It involves analyzing the DNA, identifying potential relatives on GED Match, then painstakingly piecing together family trees using public records, genealogical websites, and even historical documents.
So it's not just about the technology.
Yay.
It also requires the expertise of skilled genealogists who can act as like genetic detectives.
Precisely. And that level of expertise doesn't come cheap.
Right.
Companies specializing in this type of analysis can charge thousands of dollars for a single case. It's a testament to the complexity and labor involved in this work.
That's fascinating. It's like a blend of cutting-edge science and old-fashioned detective work.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I read about a case called Mr. X that really highlighted the ingenuity of forensic genetic genealogy.
Ah, yes, Mr. X. He committed suicide in 2002 and lived under a stolen identity.
Oh, wow.
Making identification a challenge. But investigators weren't deterred. They had a degraded DNA sample from a tumor biopsy,
Okay.
which is not ideal, but they were determined to use it to unravel his true identity.
So they had a damaged piece of the puzzle, and they needed to figure out where it fit.
Exactly. They started by focusing on the Y chromosome DNA, which is passed down from fathers to sons,
Okay.
hoping to get a lead on his last name. Eventually, they used whole genome sequencing and GED match to analyze as much of his DNA as possible from that degraded sample.
Whole genome sequencing. Now that sounds intense.
It's basically reading the entire genetic code of an individual.
Wow.
Imagine trying to reassemble a shredded document, but instead of paper, it's DNA. It's a complex process, but it allowed investigators to compare Mr. X's DNA to a much broader range of potential relatives on GED match.
I see. So they cast a wider net hoping to find a stronger connection.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how did they go from a DNA match to an actual identity? I imagine that's where the real detective work begins, right?
Absolutely. They had to comb through public records, genealogical databases, historical documents, anything that could help them build a family tree and trace his lineage.
Wow.
It was a long and painstaking process, but it eventually paid off.
They were able to identify him.
Yes. After months of research, they identified him as Robert Ivan Nichols, a man who had abandoned his family decades earlier.
Wow.
It was a remarkable feat demonstrating just how far forensic genetic genealogy has come.
That's incredible. It seems like we're just scratching the surface of what this technology can do.
But I have to admit, the idea of my DNA potentially being out there, connecting me to crimes or investigations I have nothing to do with, is a little unsettling. I understand. It's a topic that raises a lot of important questions about privacy and the ethical implications of using genetic information in this way.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely curious to delve deeper into those ethical considerations.
Yeah.
But for now, I'm still amazed by the Mr. X case. They were able to identify him from a degraded DNA sample.
Right.
It makes you wonder what else we can learn from DNA.
That's a great question. It turns out we're not just limited to identifying individuals. Researchers are now developing algorithms that can predict physical characteristics from DNA.
Really?
Imagine being able to generate a sketch of a suspect just from DNA left at a crime scene.
Wow, hold on. So we're talking about predicting what someone looks like based on their DNA.
Yeah.
That sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It might sound futuristic, but it's becoming a reality. We can already predict things like eye color with a high degree of accuracy.
Wow.
And research is progressing rapidly on predicting other traits like hair texture, face shape, and even predisposition to certain diseases.
Okay, that's both fascinating and a little bit unnerving.
Yeah.
It seems like we're entering uncharted territory where our DNA can reveal more about us than we ever imagined.
We are indeed, and that brings us to a whole new set of ethical dilemmas and questions about the appropriate use of this technology. Where do we draw the line between solving crimes and protecting individual privacy?
Right.
How do we ensure that this technology isn't misused or doesn't exacerbate existing biases in the justice system?
Those are some heavy questions, and I have a feeling we're only going to see more of them as this technology continues to evolve.
I think so, too.
It's clear that forensic genetic genealogy is a powerful tool, but with great power comes great responsibility.
Absolutely. And that's a responsibility we all share. As we move forward, it's crucial that we have open and honest conversations about the implications of this technology and how we want to use it.
Well said. It sounds like we have a lot more to discuss, especially when it comes to those ethical considerations.
We do. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore those very questions. Go delving into the potential risks and benefits of forensic genetic genealogy and what it means for the future of privacy and justice.
Stay tuned. So we've been talking about how forensic genetic genealogy is solving these cold cases.
Right.
But it feels like we're opening a Pandora's box when it comes to privacy.
Yeah, it's a valid concern. We're essentially using genetic information, which is so incredibly personal, to identify individuals sometimes without their knowledge or consent.
Wow.
It's like we're shining a spotlight on people's family histories, and not everyone wants that kind of exposure.
Right. It's one thing to, voluntarily share your DNA for ancestry research.
Right.
But it's a whole different ballgame when that information is used for criminal investigations, especially when it involves distant relatives who might not even know they're connected.
Exactly. Imagine a scenario where, a distant cousin uploads their DNA to GED match.
Right.
And that information leads to the identification of a family member who committed a crime years ago. The implications are huge, not just for the individual involved, but for the entire family.
It's almost like genetic guilt by association.
Right.
You could be implicated in a crime simply because you shared DNA with someone who was involved.
Yeah.
That's a pretty unsettling thought.
It is, and it raises a lot of questions about where we draw the line.
Right.
How much genetic information is too much to share?
Yeah.
Who should have access to that information? And how do we ensure that it's used responsibly and ethically?
Yeah, it feels like we're in uncharted territory here.
Yeah.
We have this powerful new tool, but we haven't figured out all the rules of the game yet.
That's a good way to put it. Forensic genetic genealogy is still a relatively new field.
Right.
And the legal and ethical frameworks are still catching up.
Yeah.
We're grappling with questions that have never been asked before, and there are no easy answers.
So where do we even begin? How do we start to address these concerns?
Yeah.
And ensure that this technology is used in a way that protects individual rights and doesn't lead to unintended consequences?
Well, I think the first step is acknowledging that there are risks involved.
Okay.
We can't just blindly embrace this technology without considering the potential downsides.
Right. It's like any new technology, there's always a period of adjustment.
Right.
Where we need to figure out how to use it safely and responsibly.
Exactly. And with forensic genetic genealogy, that means having open and honest conversations about the ethical implications involving not just scientists and law enforcement, but also ethicists, policymakers, and the public. We need a multifaceted approach to address these complex issues.
Yeah, it's a team effort for sure. We need everyone at the table to ensure that this technology is used for good and doesn't become a tool for discrimination or invasion of privacy. But what does that look like in practice?
Yeah.
How do we translate these concerns into concrete actions?
That's the challenge, isn't it? We need to develop clear guidelines for how this technology is used, who has access to the data, and what safeguards are in place to protect individual privacy.
It's like writing an instruction manual for a powerful new machine.
Right.
We need to be very careful about how we operate it to avoid any accidents or misuse.
Right.
But who's responsible for writing that manual? And who enforces the rules?
That's where things get a little tricky.
Yeah.
Because we're dealing with genetic information, which is so sensitive and has implications for entire families.
Right.
The stakes are higher than with many other technologies.
So we need a system of checks and balances.
Yeah.
Right? To make sure that no one entity has too much power over this information.
Exactly. We need transparency, accountability, and oversight to ensure that forensic genetic genealogy is used ethically and responsibly. That might involve new legislation, stricter regulations, and independent review boards to provide guidance and oversight.
It sounds like a lot of work, but it seems essential if we want to harness the power of this technology without compromising our values.
I agree.
But what about the companies that provide these genetic testing services?
Oh, yeah.
Where do they fit into all of this?
That's another crucial piece of the puzzle.
Right.
These companies hold a vast amount of genetic data.
Right.
And it's important to understand how they're collecting, storing, and using that information.
Right. It's our DNA.
Yeah.
But are we really in control of it once we send it off to these companies?
Right.
What's to stop them from selling it or using it in ways we didn't consent to?
That's a valid concern. We need to be aware of the terms of service we agree to when using these services, and we need to advocate for stronger privacy protections for our genetic information.
It feels like a David and Goliath situation sometimes. These companies are huge and powerful, and we're just individuals trying to navigate this complex new world of genetics.
That's why it's so important to have these conversations and raise awareness about the potential risks and benefits of forensic genetic genealogy. The more we understand about this technology, the better equipped we'll be to make informed decisions about our own genetic data and advocate for policies that reflect our values.
It's about taking ownership of our genetic narratives.
Right.
Ensuring that they're not exploited or misused.
Precisely. And it's about recognizing that this is an ongoing conversation, not a one-time debate.
Right.
As technology continues to evolve, so too will the ethical dilemmas we face.
We need to be adaptable and vigilant, constantly reevaluating our approach to forensic genetic genealogy as new challenges arise.
I agree.
We've spent this deep dive really digging into forensic genetic genealogy.
Yeah.
A tool that's undeniably powerful, but comes with a whole host of ethical questions.
It does. It forces us to think about, where we draw the line between public safety and individual privacy.
Right.
It's a balancing act, and finding that equilibrium isn't easy.
It feels like we're on the edge of a new era where our genetic code is becoming increasingly intertwined with the justice system.
Right.
On the one hand, it's exciting to see these cold cases getting solved and families finally getting answers.
Right.
But I keep coming back to the question of unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. We have to consider not just the immediate benefits of this technology, but also the long-term implications.
Yeah.
What kind of society are we creating when our DNA becomes a tool for surveillance and investigation?
It's like a genetic echo effect, where decisions made today could ripple through generations.
Yeah.
Imagine a future where people are hesitant to share their genetic information for medical research
Right.
because they're worried it might be used against them or their family members in some way.
That's a real concern. The potential for chilling effects is something we have to consider seriously.
Right.
If people become fearful of the implications, it could hinder scientific progress in areas like personalized medicine and disease research.
So how do we balance the potential benefits of forensic genetic genealogy with the need to protect individual rights and ensure that this technology isn't misused? It feels like we're walking a tightrope.
We are, and finding that balance requires a multifaceted approach.
Right.
It starts with acknowledging that there are legitimate concerns about privacy and potential misuse.
Right.
We can't just brush those concerns aside.
Right. It's not about being anti-technology or anti-progress.
Right.
It's about being thoughtful and proactive in how we integrate these powerful new tools into our society.
Exactly. It's about asking the tough questions, considering the unintended consequences, and establishing safeguards to prevent abuses.
So what are some concrete steps we can take? We've talked about legislation, regulation, oversight,
Right.
but what else needs to happen?
I think education is key.
Okay.
The more people understand about forensic genetic genealogy, the better equipped they'll be to make informed decisions about their own genetic data and advocate for policies that reflect their values.
It's about empowering individuals to take control of their genetic narratives.
Right. It's also about fostering a culture of transparency and accountability within the law enforcement agencies and the companies that handle our genetic information.
Right.
We need to know how our data is being used and what safeguards are in place to protect our privacy.
It sounds like a lot of work, and it probably won't be easy.
Yeah.
But it seems essential if we want to harness the power of this technology without sacrificing our fundamental rights.
It is a lot of work, and it's an ongoing process. As technology continues to evolve,
Right.
so too will the ethical challenges we face.
Right.
We need to be adaptable, constantly reevaluating our approach to forensic genetic genealogy
Right.
and adjusting our safeguards as needed.
Yeah, it's a reminder that technology is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill.
Right.
The responsibility ultimately lies with us as a society
Yeah.
to ensure that forensic genetic genealogy is used ethically and responsibly.
Well said. This technology has the potential to make a real difference in people's lives.
Right.
But we need to proceed with caution, wisdom, and a deep respect for individual rights.
It's a fascinating field full of possibilities and potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the key takeaway is that this conversation is just beginning.
It is.
We all need to stay informed, engaged, and willing to speak up about the ethical implications of forensic genetic genealogy as it continues to shape the future of justice.
Absolutely. The future of our genetic privacy and how it intersects with the pursuit of justice is something we all have a stake in.
Well, that's all the time we have for today.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in to our deep dive on forensic genetic genealogy.